Welcome in. Ready to dive deep?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, today, Frederick Douglass. His story is incredible,
Oh, absolutely.
and we really want to understand what made him so impactful. But, for me, the most surprising thing was he chose the name Frederick Douglass later in life, right?
Yeah.
He was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey.
It's true. And that name change, honestly, it's key to his whole story.
Wow.
It wasn't just like, picking a cool name out of a hat.
Right.
It was calculated, survival,
Yeah.
and powerful, like reclaiming himself.
Uh-huh.
But we're getting ahead. We'll circle back to that.
Okay.
Let's start at the beginning.
Let's go back to the beginning, early life. I mean, the story that really got me was him learning to read. His mistress, Sophia Auld, starts teaching him the alphabet. It seems unbelievable at that time and place.
Right. I mean, it does, doesn't it? But it's almost like this tiny, tiny flicker of humanity in a system that is just designed to, deny it at every turn.
Right.
But here's the thing. Sophia's husband, Hugh Auld, he picks up on this.
Oh, no.
And he realizes how dangerous literacy is. Knowledge, right? In the hands of someone who's enslaved, it's like you're giving them a weapon.
Wow. So he actually forbade her from continuing the lessons.
He did. And, I think for Douglass, that's fuel to the fire.
Wow.
Because it really cemented in his mind that knowledge equals power.
Yeah.
And I think it's just amazing how this one act seems so small.
Right.
But the impact it had on his life, huge.
It really is. I think it speaks to the human spirit.
Yeah.
That even when you try to suppress it, we all have this drive for knowledge. And sometimes, we can take it for granted, that access.
Exactly. And think about it. For him, this wasn't like learning your multiplication tables.
Right.
This was about agency. In a world that was telling him constantly, you don't have any, imagine someone saying, you can't learn your mind. That's the threat.
Wow. And that just makes his determination even more awe-inspiring. Like, he was not going to be controlled. I read he even traded bread for lessons from kids in his neighborhood.
He did. I mean, it just shows you, his character.
Right.
Like, not waiting for permission, not waiting for somebody to say, okay, here's your chance. No, he was making it happen.
Yeah.
And that self-education, it became the basis of everything.
Okay, so we have this young Frederick, right? Denied formal education, but driven. And then he makes this incredible escape at 20 years old.
Yeah.
Can you even imagine?
This is where things get really interesting. So remember, Fugitive Slave Act. Escape is insanely dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
But Douglass, he gets his hands on some borrowed papers.
Wow.
And he uses them to make his way to freedom.
I can't even imagine that bravery, the constant fear.
Unimaginable.
Mhm.
But for him, freedom wasn't just like arriving somewhere.
Right.
It was, I have a responsibility now.
Yeah.
Because my experience is my voice, right?
Yes.
That's how we fight back against this thing that tried to silence me.
And that responsibility, it led him to this decision that would change everything. He changes his name from Frederick Bailey to Frederick Douglass.
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah.
More than a name change, honestly.
no.
It's like strategy, right?
Yeah.
Fugitive Slave Act, you got to disappear.
Right.
New identity makes you harder to find.
Like becoming invisible.
Exactly. But then there's the other layer, the symbolic one.
Oh, yeah.
He's shedding that name that was forced on him, tied to his enslavement. This is about claiming himself.
Rebirth, almost. And with that new identity, it's like he steps onto this bigger stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And his voice, I mean, shaped by everything he'd gone through, it just resonates so powerfully.
Totally. And, his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave.
Oh, I know that one.
It blew up. It wasn't just a book.
Right. It became a phenomenon.
Exactly.
So what made his story different? I know he was an amazing speaker, but there's something more, right?
Way more. See, Douglass, he wasn't just telling a story.
He was dismantling this whole narrative that people had used to justify slavery for, centuries.
It's true. I mean, think about it.
Imagine at a time when racist stereotypes are everywhere.
Everywhere.
He comes in, eloquent, intelligent,
Right.
challenging the core of those beliefs.
So he's forcing people to confront the truth through his own experiences.
Exactly. And not just information. He made you feel it.
It's emotional, yeah.
He describes being broken in body, soul, and spirit, his confidence shattered.
Oh.
You read those words, you can't help but be moved. And it wasn't just America that hurt him.
He took his message international, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Ireland, Britain, everywhere advocating for abolition. Think about the guts that took. To be that visible, knowing the risks,
Because he was a target.
absolutely. But he also knew his voice could tip the scales.
It's amazing. So he's challenging America's morality, but on this global stage.
Exactly. And, he found a lot of support over there. People really connected with him.
Did they?
Oh, yeah. They were moved. His eloquence, his story, it resonated across the Atlantic. They even raised funds to buy his freedom.
Wow. That's incredible. It shows you these issues, even back then, they were all connected. What happened here didn't stay here.
Exactly. It's all connected. But, fame like that, it came with a price.
Of course.
The more they knew his name, the more danger he was in.
It's true. The risks were huge. But he comes back to the U.S., and he just throws himself right back into the fight for abolition. He didn't stop there, did he?
No way. In fact, he takes it up a notch.
Oh, yeah.
Founds his own newspaper, the North Star.
The North Star. What a powerful name. What was his vision for it?
Okay, so for Douglass, the North Star, yeah, it was ending slavery for sure, but it was bigger than that.
I see.
It was a place for, all these social justice issues.
Yeah.
Women's rights, education reform, the whole 9 yards.
He saw those things as connected, even back then. Wow. Make you think, right? These conversations, we're still having them.
Totally. Douglass, he was ahead of his time. He got that real equality. It meant tackling everything. He said, right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the father of us all, and we are all brethren. Powerful stuff.
It really is. And he wasn't afraid to disagree, even with his own side. Like that whole debate with William Lloyd Garrison.
Oh, yeah, the Constitution.
Garrison thought it was pro-slavery, that it needed to be thrown out completely.
Totally. Saw it as broken from the inside out.
But Douglass, he had a different take.
He did. Douglass thought the Constitution, it could be a tool, right? If
Yeah.
you interpret it through this lens of equality, then it works.
So he was more about working within the system to change it.
Exactly. And for him, black voting rights. Essential for that to happen. Political power was everything.
Then, of course, the Civil War, everything changes.
Right. The whole nation divided.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for him. To see the thing he'd been fighting for, it was at the heart of this conflict.
Yeah, and he didn't hesitate. He saw the Civil War as this chance to finally break the back of slavery.
So he was all for it.
Oh, yeah. And he pushes hard for black soldiers to be allowed to fight for the Union.
Which, I mean, even some abolitionists disagreed with that, didn't they? They thought it was wrong to participate in a war they saw as unjust.
For sure, there were different opinions on that. And even Lincoln, he wasn't sold at first.
He wasn't.
No, he was worried about alienating the border states.
That makes sense.
But Douglass, he meets with Lincoln, makes his case. He argues that black soldiers, it's not just the right thing, it's strategically the smart thing.
He really knew how to frame those arguments, didn't he? And eventually, Lincoln comes around.
He does. Douglass, other abolitionists, black leaders, they all pushed hard. And it worked. Black soldiers, they changed the course of the war.
They proved their courage, their commitment to freedom.
Exactly. And that paved the way for the Emancipation Proclamation. And, ultimately, the end of slavery.
It's hard to overstate how important he was in making all that happen. But even after the war, he didn't just, retire. He kept going.
Oh, no. The fight wasn't over for him.
Oh.
Civil rights for all Americans. That was his mission.
He held government positions, spoke out for women's suffrage. I mean, he really did do it all.
He did. Frederick Douglass, he wasn't content to just watch history happen. He shaped it. And honestly, his story, it still resonates today.
It really does. It reminds us that one person can make a difference.
Absolutely. Even when it seems impossible. And more than that, it reminds us that the work is never done. We all have a part to play in building that better future he fought so hard for.
So well said. Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the life of Frederick Douglass. It's been truly inspiring.
My pleasure. Anytime.